We apologize for the delay in terms of the start of the meeting. We're going to go ahead and get started. You'll notice that I brought our very special guest back because I forgot to give him a gift the last time he was here, and so that's the reason why he's back. That's not the only reason why he's back, but there have been some pretty significant changes to the IE squared model and to the charter system model in the last 7 days. Yes. And when I saw them, yes, they're pretty significant. When I saw them, I saw them 2 days ago, and I said, I need to have Lou come back and explain what does this mean? Because we have been looking at this in a context with the former slides, but this new information, in my opinion, could be something that we need to consider as we're looking at all of the models. So he's back to talk about the changes for that, and he's going to walk us through the major edits. Now you'll notice that your slides in front of you are like 100 and some odd slides. He's not going to go over all 99 of his slides. He's going to go over the majority of the changes that we haven't seen to date, and a lot of those changes are related to consequences, performance targets, as well as the governance model and how that governance model may look under charter system. So Lou is back to kind of explain some of the major changes, and then we're going to talk about our work after he kind of walks us through those changes. But I definitely wanted to thank him for coming. This is his third time. I don't know if he spent this much time with all of his districts, but I want to thank him in advance for coming at such short notice to kind of walk us through the major changes. But I'm going to go ahead and, because he offered to come in the 6 o'clock hour, I want to go ahead and get him to his content so he can kind of walk us through the major changes and for us to get started with those changes. Here you go.
Great. Thank you. And thanks for having me back. I'm sure you're sick of me by now. What I'll do is go to the slides that have been either added, expanded, or to the new slides we've added. For example, we went from 2 slides under I squared to 20. So things haven't changed as much as we now have all the information that would go in. This is the final stake in the ground. This is what the board has said it wants as policy. The rule that will be formally adopted that was made public last week for charter system incorporates all this. This incorporates all that. We agreed to this with the board and then rewrote the rule. And we're also going to rewrite the IE squared rule to match this and introduce that in November for adoption in December. So things that we couldn't talk about, we can now talk about. So under IE squared, that first page stays the same, nothing changed. What changed, though, is that we've agreed to a structure with GOSA that does not include proportional accountability and proportional consequences. What we did instead was, in our moment of enlightenment, say, well, you know what? Gwinnett and Forsyth and Rabun all have 3% targets. And that was going to be the lowest category of targets under the proportional. So we just said, forget that. If anybody wants any waivers at all, they can get a 3% target. So I'll talk about that briefly, but we also agreed to add beating the odds back in. It had been in and out and in and out, but it's now going to be the second look, just like it is for charter system. And so every school in the system will have the same targets, 3% per year in a variety of areas, no matter how many waivers the district has. So the whole proportional accountability thing is out the window. And that part of what was going on, obviously, is a lot of discussions on the Hill between the two branches of government that matter most. And part of the commitment we had made was to keep IE squared and charter system comparable. So the goal wasn't to make there be any reason for one over the other to be chosen as far as one would have easier measures or harder measures or more money. So the difference right now between IE squared and charter system is for IE squared there are consequences for schools for failure. For charter system, you get extra money to implement the governance stuff. So it's two different worlds, but anyway, I'll keep going and start talking about it. Again, stop me with questions as we go. So CCRPI, the last time I was here, I told you all schools would have to deal with CCRPI. That is still true. And as I said in the first category last time I was here, the 3% growth per year is 3% of the gap between wherever you're at and 100. So if you're at 50 as a school, you have to grow 3% a year of the gap, so 1.5. And I have an example slide here. The baseline year for everybody is going to be 15, 16, no matter when your IE squared contract starts. So if your contract starts on July 1st, 2015, you have a free year. You get all the waivers for nothing. You don't have any targets because your baseline is the following year, which you won't know about until the following year. So, you know, there's a really long, the first year in which you could have consequences imposed if you waited around for us to impose them would be 2019 or 2020. So it's a very strange scenario. We'll kind of walk through it here. And the reason we're using 15, 16 as the base year is, you may recall, Georgia Milestones is being pilot tested in 14, 15, and it won't count for anybody, teachers and principals, TEKS and LEAKS. We're going to get that waiver from the feds. You know, it's been waived for students in 14, 15. So 15, 16 will be the first year that Georgia Milestones counts. So that's why 15, 16 will be the baseline. Yes? Sure. Is that better? I can hear myself now. Okay. So here's the example. CCRPI, this school has 60. It's at 60. So the gap is 40. 100 minus 60 is 40. And then you'd take 3% of 40. It's 1.2 points per year. So the target in the first year would be 61.2, and then 62.4, and so on. So you'd have to go from 60 to 66 in 5 years. Sounds pretty reasonable, especially if you do something on purpose that will lead you to that, which is the goal of all this stuff. Yes? Every school would, depending on its starting point at the end of 15, 16, the baseline year, that'll set. So what we'll do, just so you know, is we'll do practice targets based on 14, 15, based on 13, 14, and 14, 15. So just so folks could see what it might look like as they're trying to decide. I mean, you could do your own practice targets too. Take every school CCRPI and do 3% per year, and you know what you're looking at. But the point is, we don't want people. The fact that you don't have targets for a particular year doesn't mean you're not expected to improve things. I mean, that's part of the commitment you're making. So the second thing related to CCRPI, another measure is, another factor to consider. This is related to the first one. So you have to have 3% per year unless you already start off in the top quartile within your grade cluster. So if you're in the top of all the high schools, top quartile, then all you have to do is maintain or improve that wherever you're at. So anytime you hit that threshold, you can. So if let's say you're right below the top quartile in the first 2 years, and the third year you hit the top quartile, third, fourth, and fifth years you can maintain or improve. There's an expectation that you'll improve. So here's the example for that. The CCRPI is at 84.2. The top quartile starts at 81.5. These are just example numbers. So the school just has to stay in the top quartile, continually working to improve. So it's 3%, or if you're in the top quartile or get to the top quartile, maintain or improve. Also, if you have a trend of improvement and you hit, and this is a minimum legal requirement, this isn't a recommendation. If you have a trend of improvement, you meet the equivalent of 3 years of your targets during your 5-year period, then legally you've met your minimum legal obligation for performance. So a school is non-performing only if it fails to meet the improvement targets for the 3% targets for 3 years. So so if you're a school, if every school in your district in the first 3 years hits its targets, then you could just automatically get a renewal of your IE squared contract if you want to and start over again. You don't have to manage to anything other than success. So those are all these are all conditions. So the overall measure is CCRPI, 3% per year, or if you're in the top quartile, stay there or get better. Or if you're not in the top quartile and you don't hit 3% per year, for 2 years, as long as you're going up, you'll be okay as well. So there's 3 ways to succeed on the CCRPI target. Any questions on that? Second look is the beating the odds. We'll use beating the odds as a second look. We've talked about beating the odds. I won't pause here for very long. But basically, if you fail to meet CCRPI targets each year, for any one year, beating the odds could count as if you did meet your CCRPI target. So this page you've seen already, that you have to lay out what waivers you want. You have to connect them to student improvement, performance improvement. You have to pick one of the big 4. At least you can pick as many waivers as you want, and as long as you can justify them, you'll get them. And then there's a whole bunch of things that aren't waivable, and I think all of this was in the last presentation that you saw. So the loss of governance options, you've also seen this slide here. What are the 3 that are listed in the law? The charter school conversion issue, the successful district management, or a private or nonprofit, for-profit entity. So those are the 3 that are listed, but you'll note at the top, and I told you this last time I was here, it says shall not be limited to, so you could think up other options. We decided, let's think up some options because we've seen some implemented by Gwinnett in schools that needed things implemented. That counts. So the loss of governance options, these ones on the first page, it's the district that's losing the governance, or over the school. These next ones are the district imposing a change or a loss of governance on the school. And what we're saying is that's good enough if it's timely and appropriate. So let's say that you have a non-performing school after 2 years, and you say, guess what, we're going to have them do a remedial action plan, and we're going to have our board approve it, and they're going to implement it, and they're going to address whatever the issue is. So the district could say the plan needs to include these components, or it could just say, give us whatever you want. We'll judge how smart you are and how thoughtful you are based on what you submit. There's no prerequisite for what that remedial action plan has to look like. One would expect it would identify what the problem is, why the failure to perform occurred, what are the specific steps that need to be taken to address that, what steps will be taken, what the timeline is, and so on. So another option for loss of governance at the school level would be the district could make the school make leadership changes or faculty and staff changes, or it could implement an aggressive professional development program. So maybe the problem is the adults in the building, and so that you could address it through those approaches. If it's really bad, you could reconstitute the school. The district could just say, okay, fine, game over, let's start over at this school. Kids stay here, all the adults go, and we get new adults. The 7th approach that's laid out there would be focus on the kids. We got all the right people in the right place. They're all trained well. Everybody's good. The issue is we're not doing enough for the kids. So let's do individual student achievement plans. Let's have Saturday program tutoring. Let's have after-school tutoring. So extended day, extended week, extended year. Let's do all this stuff. And focus on, since we have all the right people on the bus, let's figure out let's change the direction of the bus a little bit. So those are just 4 examples or approaches. The expectation, anything else you could think of is now number 8, because we're still open to any other ideas you might have. The expectations are that this local board would certify to the state board that loss of governance has been imposed. And if you do that, especially during the term of the contract, it's really going to be acceptable. The goal in all these cases are that there has to be a strong analysis of what went wrong and then what the solution is that's tied to that. So it can't just be a willy-nilly plan to fix it. It has to be tied to the reasons for failure. There has to be a timeline that's sufficient to have the changes take hold and work, but not too stretched out. Yep. That's how Gwinnett handled it during the term of its contract. Our expectation is that the district, however the district wants to process it, it can. All we would care about is you tell us. We know which schools have an issue. So if you get your first annual report and you've got 8 schools that are in horrible shape going backwards, we would expect you to say to us, here's what we're going to do about that, and immediately. So whichever of these options you picked, however you did it, we would expect, our expectation is you certify to us, we did our homework, we figured out why it went wrong, and we've addressed those problems. And by the way, here's a copy. We're not going to, our job won't be to review it or approve it. That's the local board's job, because they're the ones that we have the contract with, and frankly, we're not staffed to do that. Now, if the governor gets reelected and they pass a Recovery School District Act, then they might say, okay, department, you will have to consider those improvement plans as potential entries into the recovery district, but we're not going to go there. There's too many ifs in that statement. Right now, it would be between the local board and the state board. The contract is like before, and the local board's responsibility would be to address the issues. So at the end of the contract, what we'd like to be able to say is, okay, local board, you have 8 schools out of 100 that we would normally just turn into charter schools, for example, because that's what you chose. But instead, you've addressed the problem year by year by year. And even though they're not there yet, we're cool with that. We'll extend your contract because you've got, for these 3 or 5 schools, you've got them on an improvement plan that extends beyond the year of the term of the charter or the contract, and that's cool. It's kind of that's the shift. We're trying to address the 2 problems that that districts had with IE squared. 1, too many different kinds of targets. 2, the consequences are bad. So now we've given you many more consequences, some of them actually good and useful, and they're just suggestions. You can come up with better ideas than we can, I'm sure. And then we've also said there's going to be 1 target, CCRPI, and beating the odds will be your second look. We've also created an application process for IE squared. Looks a lot like the application process for charter systems. I won't read it to you, but basically you tell us what you're going to do, and then you do it, and then we process it. The application we're also creating that has 8 questions, which are very similar to the first 8 questions of the charter system application. In fact, they're identical for the first 7, except for the word IE squared system instead of charter system. So what are your district challenges? What's their rank order that you're going to address them in? How would becoming an IE squared system help you address them? What specific steps will you take to address each challenge? Connect the dots for us. Between what you're going to do and how that challenge will be addressed in the time frame of the contract, and then tell us what waivers you would be using to implement those changes that are going to lead to these better outcomes, and then tell us the timeline for doing all that stuff. And then tell us, number 8, this is different from charter system. Number 8 is, tell us about how you're going to deal with the consequences decision. Are you going to implement stuff during the term of the contract, or are you going to wait? And if whenever you're going to do it, how will you decide which consequences you'll implement? So what's your decision rule going to be? Not what will each school become if they fail, because it doesn't make sense to pick charter school as an option for a failing school if the problem is that school folks are out of control, and if you give them all this power to run, they'll just get worse. If the problem is they've got a lot of authority and they're not doing well, you might want to bring it into the fold, so reduce its autonomy. So our expectation, bottom line, is you'll pick the solution related to the problem. And so in the answer to number 8, that's basically what you have to do. Prove that you can think like that. So waivers after June 30th, we've talked about this already, that basically, and this is in the rule that's online now, that'll be adopted by the board in November.
So the rule got updated. The first draft that I saw
First draft.
was just charter system.
Right. Well, the IE squared rule, the IE squared rule is not online yet. It'll go online for initiation in November and adoption in December. It's a month behind the charter system process. This language is in the charter system rule for charter systems, but it's identical language in the IE squared rule. We're introducing the concept of updating the IE squared rule this month, putting it on the table in November, and then in December they'll adopt it. But as you saw when I talked about the targets in the baseline year, everybody gets a free year anyway in 15-16. Yeah. No, the deadline is still June 30th, 2015. Right. Right. You can take time to do your application rather than rush to get it done. What we're hoping to do and what we're pushing systems to do is spread out the application process, because one of the things, and for example, one of the things we don't want to have is 150 renewals 5 years from now. So what we'll be doing is doing charter system contracts and I-squared contracts of differing lengths. The law provides for 5 years only for I-squared. We're either going to have the law changed or ignore it, because we'll give high-performing schools more time and lower-performing schools less time, because it's just the high-performing districts are, can handle it, and the schools that are challenged, those districts we can't grant all this flexibility without the sort of accountability sooner. So what we'll end up with 5 years from now, hopefully our goal is to ration it out so there's like 30 systems per year coming up for renewal. So over a 5-year period, there's 100, I guess it has to be more than 30 to get to 180, right? Somebody do the math, Chuck. Okay, 32. Yes.
So in terms of when we put in a letter of what our preference is as a school district, the earlier we put that in, then the farther we are up at the top of the line in terms of you're getting to work with us and giving us feedback on our application. That has not changed. Is that correct?
Well, it's first come, first. We have resources from the General Assembly to help districts that are going charter with that whole local school governance thing. So that's first come, first served. So the sooner, if you go charter, the sooner you get your letter of intent in for a charter system, the more likely you'd be able to tap into some of those consultants to help you. But once that once those people are fully committed, then the districts that give letters of intent afterwards won't. All that consulting is just pre-application, so they would help you get you through the process.
Okay, and then the second question is in terms of if we're looking for either I-square or charters, we still have to be mindful of the date about waivers, if we want to apply for waivers. So that has not changed either.
Correct. The district will still have to apply for them for 15-16.
And we would have to do that in a time frame in which to be able to get those waivers for the upcoming school year.
Correct. And so the best bet is to apply in early January. We had applications for waivers this month, which were a little bit late for this fiscal year, which we recommended denial for because they were late. Because there's a process, but we might loosen up on that one. Other questions? So that's the I-squared changes in a nutshell. Yes.
I have a quick question about the timeline. In the previous PowerPoint, it indicated that the time for application, the time that it takes to review the application, can be anywhere from 3 to 8 months. Would you say that the time frame is similar for the I-squared now, given all that's included in here?
We actually, because I-squared now will be much easier because everything is decided in advance. You won't have, the only thing that, your application is going to have the answers to those questions, but that's just essentially a way to prove that you can connect the dots on your waivers. It'll take you about the time that you would have spent going back and forth with the department and GOSA on your contract negotiations. You'll now spend figuring out what your application is going to look like. Once we get it, instead of like 18 to 24 months for I-squared, we're just saying it can be done as quickly as 3 months, because we only take a month to process it internally, and then it goes to the state board for 2 months. So we've done them in 2 months before.
Okay.
But again, it's the first come first serve thing. Right now is a good time. A year from now, it might be 18 months again. just because of reality, but we'll deal with that. We'll burn that bridge when we come to it. Any other questions on IE squared? Okay, charter system. There's less expansion here, but we did clarify a bunch of things. So, school level governance, we basically, you've seen the slides where we talk about how important it is, how the General Assembly expects us to make sure you're doing it and all that. What we clarified here is on the second bullet, that although the superintendent and the local board have to give consideration to the recommendations and input of the local school governance teams, the local board ultimately retains its constitutional authority. And so that's a polite way of saying that ultimately the superintendent and the local board could ignore the recommendations of the local school governance teams. Now, if they do that in a sort of patterned way that suggests they're not really committed to being charter system, we would move to terminate the charter contract. Because the expectation is that you go into this committed to considering what the local school governance teams are recommending. It's not just a fun thing to do. You're doing this because you think it's the best model for your district and it's going to help. So because money is changing hands, you're getting money if you pick this one. You know, and granted, you have to spend that money on training your local school governance teams anyway, or implementing your innovations. You know, there's a different level of scrutiny. So, while that's what it says, because that's what the Constitution says, the local board gets to do what it wants. It's got the constitutional authority to do everything, not the local school governance team. The expectation is you're going to propose to us, and you're going to tell us what decisions will your local school governance teams be able to make, either exclusively or in partnership with the superintendent. And we will put that, once it's acceptable to us, we will put it in the charter system contract. So while the law may not force you to do it that way, contract law will, because you'll be committing yourself to doing it and we'll be giving you something of value in return. So bottom line, you shouldn't go charter system unless you're committed to this local school governance, and whatever it is you put in your application, if it's acceptable, will end up in your contract, so you're going to have to implement it, or we will move to terminate. So there's no reason to go through the termination procedure. Just don't get into it if you don't want to do it.
Can you talk about what some of that local school governance looks like?
Yes. In fact, we have a couple slides on that. Let me work my way to them. We added this language in that where the law says that districts have to maximize local school governance. So the maximize is part of what I'll be answering Pete in a second. What do we think that means? So that chart you've seen before, I think in the last version. In the pink box it now says, instead of mentioning override of decisions, it says they'll exercise their constitutional authority. They'll retain. The local board will retain its constitutional authority. And we got rid of the override language for a couple of reasons. One, local boards across the state, when they saw the draft rules, said, wait, why put us in the position of having to override? Why not just frame this properly so that we're all a team going into this? We're like, okay. So that's why that language has changed. So I think the general categories are the same. But let me jump to the application and get to the local school governance matrix. So local school governance, okay. So in the first year, the charter system has to allow the local school governance team to be the decision makers in all 5 of the following areas. And you'll notice the language changed from select the principal to recommend the principal, from finalize the school level budget to input into the school level budget, input into selection of curriculum, approval of school improvement goals and oversight of SIP implementation, and input into school operations consistent with the school's improvement plan and the charter goals. So to answer your question, Pete, it's less rigorous than it was in the last draft, which was what the original proposal was on the rule, and it's intended, again, to circle back to the constitutional issue. Rather than create a conflict structure to start with, since it's supposed to be a partnership, we changed it to reflect that it is a partnership to start with. So the local school governance team works with the principal at the school. They recommend stuff to the superintendent. The superintendent works in partnership with them to recommend stuff to the local board, and the local board works in partnership with the superintendent to make decisions. So, yes?
You indicated that you can make decisions on what the local school governance teams will actually have oversight over?
Correct. This is the minimum.
Okay, that's the minimum.
Yep.
So then my next question is, how does one strike a balance of power then between these committees, these groups, and the schools? I just see that, I'm concerned about how that would actually play out.
That, in fact, is one of the most fun parts about writing a charter system application, is having that internal discussion. And filling out this grid here, or the old grid if you want to, basically gives you all a chance to really hash out what it should look like. Because, as I said, we've got 28 charter systems and 28 different versions of this right now. So the chart on the next page says the minimum. So it's like, when are you going to do it, and how are you going to do it, all the things we just said. But then the rightmost column is, how are you going to maximize? What else are you going to grant in each of these areas, if anything, and when, and how? So the rightmost column is the real test of the commitment of the district to local school governance. The middle column is, you got to do it anyway, just tell us about your timing and your implementation plan. The rightmost column is, what else? What additional authority? And that's where, you know, there's no reason at all the district couldn't say, you know what? And in Warren County's example I always use, the local board said, whatever the school governance teams choose, whatever they decide, it's automatically done. We will adopt it, period. Period. Even if it's a bad decision, because then they'll have to go back and sort out that they made a mistake and figure it out. So they hired the wrong person for a high school principal once. It took 6 months before they replaced the person, but they never hired a bad principal again. And that was the local board's point. You know, if we're going to believe in this local school governance stuff, we're actually going to give them authority and power, and then let them learn from their mistakes. Not be mommy and daddy and keep them from making a mistake. Let them fall, you know, and heal. So it's the rightmost column that's the most critical when you're thinking through whether this makes sense for you as a district, because anybody could do the minimum. In fact, Clark County was worried about this choice, and I said, after talking to the superintendent, you're 85% of the way there. And then we changed the rule, and I talked to him on the phone yesterday. He said, so what'd you do to me? I said, we just made you 95% of the way there, just by changing the minimum requirement. So a lot of districts are already doing most of the stuff in the minimum column. Any questions on that, Pete? Did I get to your? Okay. There's a couple pages that kind of lay it out, and there's a bunch of other examples of other things you could do in each of those areas. Not that you have to do any of those are just examples. But it's the core charter question. If you're thinking to be a charter system, how chartery do you want to be? And again, there's no right answer to how chartery you have to be. It's just got to work. You don't get an award for being really chartery, and you don't get punished for being less chartery. What you're proving to us in the application process is we pick the right amount of chartery. You know, we've got enough local school governance for us. This works in our situation now, and we're going to grow it. We're going to maximize it over the next 3 or 4 years. That's good. I think, yep, that's it for charter system changes. Status quo, I know you're less concerned about, but we got a lot more specific and I think put in some more examples about what is and isn't. Actually, we added expenditure controls and categorical because that's not allowed. So in the interest of having the final stake in the ground, we tried to add a little bit more information in a few places. So basically, bottom line, you only get waivers under status quo if your calculation that you could afford to do it without waivers turns out to be wrong because of something big that happened after you made that commitment. So you only want to be status quo if you can afford to be it, and you would only ever ask for a waiver if you had some natural disaster or financial disaster that changed your circumstances. So I think we kind of answered all that last time. So that's it for changes. So anything else you want me to, any other questions or? All right, thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Lou. I want to, as a token of my appreciation for coming in 3 times, I meant to give you this a while back, so I do apologize. But I made sure it was a little bit bigger this time since you came for the 3rd time. Thank you.
Is it a whole liter now?
Thank you, thank you. All right, so we wanted to make sure that you all had an opportunity to debrief on the changes. So you'd have a little bit more information. Yeah, sure, while he's here. Here you go.
So, given these rule changes, what would
You just meant to close it up.
what would be the biggest changes between the 2 models? Just the identifying the front and the local school government?
Actually, yeah, nothing's changed, but the biggest differences are for I squared. They're equal in terms of targets. They're equal in terms of measurement. They're equal in terms of everything except for I squared. If a school fails to perform, then there has to be a consequence imposed on that school, either by the district or failing that by the state. So that's the key distinguishing factor about I squared. For charter system, targets are the same, measures are the same. The difference is in a charter system, you're choosing it because you want to implement local school governance. And in addition to having to figure out what that looks like and coming up with enough of it to get approved, you also get extra funds per pupil for doing that. Those extra funds can be used either for implementing an innovation that you're committing to that's going to raise the test scores at your schools, or to train your local school governance teams, or to let them compete for that money and figure out how to spend it themselves to help the school. No, unless you choose to impose them. But that's not a requirement of law or application. Pardon? There's a consequence to the system because we won't renew your charter system contract if you let that happen. But we leave the responsibility to you to address and the timing and the and what that looks like. So that it's a system. We're holding you accountable as a system. So there's no school by school targets in IE square or in charter system.
Yep, that was my question. So IE squared is still the binder full of school level targets. Charter system is overall district wide targets.
Right. There will be the 3% targets. Everybody gets the same targets in the whole state, whatever they are. But the contract won't include the targets for each school for charter system. It will be included in IE squared because those consequences are school level. For charter system, you manage that list. We will care if the percentage of your schools that aren't beating the odds, for example, or that aren't hitting your target, that you're suddenly measured. You have much greater risk of losing your charter than you do of losing your IE squared contract. It'll be easier to get a renewal of an IE squared contract because if you're handling the situation at the schools year by year, then you've proven that you can manage this. If you're a charter system and you've got failing schools and you're not managing them, then we're basically going to say, we've given you, system, the flexibility. We're taking it away because you're going to be status quo. So, of course, a charter system, and our expectation is, and you're going to tell us in the app, we're going to manage school by school targets. This is how we're going to deal with it. But you won't have to have all of the information school by school as you do for IE squared.
Second question. Then could we request a full flexibility waiver with an IE squared contract?
You can't really call it that because the law requires you to list all the waivers that you want. But in essence, we're going to come up with some language that allows that somehow, some way. But the key is for charter system. Okay, Gwinnett. They in our negotiations back and forth yesterday, they sent us, or 2 days ago, they sent us the new list of waivers that they want for their follow-on contract. So we wrote back today and said we told you that we needed to know how this was tied to whatever you're going to do to improve things. We can't find that in here. So answer questions 1 through 8 and send it back to us. So in essence, they're asking for a limited number, maybe it's 30 now, waivers. But it's all anybody would use if they had a broad flexibility waiver anyway. So, sorry to beat the horse because it's a technicality, but I like to.
So you still have to know in advance what flexibility it is that you.
No, you have to just have a clue and prove that you have a clue. Because, you can ask for everything, but if you don't have a conceivable reason for wanting it, then, it's not that we wouldn't give it to you, it's just that we would like to know that. We want to know how much of what you're asking for you have a conceivable reason for asking for.
So if there were 30 waivers asked for, and then through the course of your IE squared contract, you realize, we probably need 3 other waivers on top of those 30, could the system go back and say, we need these 3 additional waivers?
Sure. Yeah, no reason not to. And what we want to do up front is, if you don't ask for enough waivers, is push back and say, well, what about this, this, and that? Because we know what waivers districts use and what they use them for. And the bulk of, for the most part, the waivers are for financial reasons to support the academic program, and there's a handful of waivers that allow sort of programmatic things, but it's not a very big circle. Anybody who lists more than 8 waivers is kind of stretching it, because there's just no history of districts asking for and using waivers beyond that really core group. But that's not to say we want to prove it. A contract with 30 in them. It's just that you have to kind of, don't give us your shopping list. Don't give us the whole menu. Tell us what you've chosen for dinner, and what you want for your sides and what you want for dessert. We might still end up giving you the shopping list or the whole menu, but this is about capacity.
With the changes under IE squared, I'd just like for you to spell out how differently GOSA's role is going to be with that target setting. It looks like there's now going to be a negotiation between the school system, Georgia Department of Education, and GOSA. And I want to make sure I'm hearing correctly that all of the consequences for non-performance are set by the district in advance as it's writing up its IE squared proposal.
GOSA's role, there's no change in GOSA's role, but we've preempted them having to negotiate 150 separate sets of targets if there's 150 districts that want to do this, by saying up front, here's the targets. So that part's done. Those aren't negotiable. Those are the minimums. If a district wants to say, we'd like 20 more targets per school, we would probably say, well, that's ridiculous. But if you really want us to hold you accountable for it and potentially cancel your contract if you fail, maybe that makes sense, maybe it doesn't. But bottom line, the minimum required targets are chosen. They're done. So there's really no negotiating targets at this point. So that makes their life a lot easier. Their job is monitoring. They have 2 roles, target setting and monitoring. And so they'll have to be monitoring every school. And it's on fewer measures now. It's on 2 measures. We do the beating the odds. We do CCRPI, but they validate everything. So the second question was
Consequences for
the consequences. Those consequences are suggestions. The district in the application for IE squared would have to say, here's how we're going to handle the consequences. They could say we're going to make every school that fails a charter school. Or they could say we're going to make every school that fails a contract with Green Dot, even if they're not a high school. That doesn't really make sense. So we would push back if somebody proposed that. What we want to see in the application is we will choose consequences that are consistent with the need that the school has in terms of its reason for failing. And so we're going to consider the following 7 consequences, and we'll do an analysis on an annual basis and figure it out. And we'll implement it during the course of the contract. So we've proven to you, state, that by the end of the contract, you don't need to walk in here and take our schools away and give them to somebody else. We've handled it. Even if they haven't successfully improved sufficiently by the 5th or 6th year, we've got them on track. And if you can prove they're on track and the intervention made a difference because there was an inflection point in the performance, we'll be cool with that.
So under IE squared, is there any scenario under which the state either GOSA or Georgia Department of Education could affirmatively decide what the consequences are?
Well, they're in the contract, so you're not picking a particular consequence for a particular school in the contract
You're
like you
picking-
used to have to.
you're setting up a
picking,
menu.
You're picking an approach. If you fail to implement anything, and you say you're going to, and if the majority of your schools fail, we would choose which schools would need to be kind of turned into something different and taken out of your control. And we would also non-renew your contract and you'd be status quo.
Do you know which of these slides that is on, that provision there? Continuous non-performance and a lack of a demonstration that the district is doing anything to correct the problems, then leading to a larger result from the state. Is that documented on either of the slides
It's
here?
documented in the positive, where we say, this is what you have to do. So the opposite of that is something you don't want to do.
Any other questions?
Bottom line, we won't agree to an I-squared contract where that's not clear. Right, because that's why what I'm talking about is contract language.
What's the percentage of schools that you would deem as the number when you have to decide on whether you would lose like your charter if a certain percentage of schools were underperforming? What's that percentage?
No idea, we haven't decided.
Okay, because I heard you say majority around her question as well, and I was
Right.
just curious.
Well, definitely a majority would be a trigger. But, a third might be a trigger too. I mean, if you got 4 schools, 2 might make a difference, 1 might make it. I mean, it really depends on your context as well. But bottom line, as you saw from the slide, the expectation is there will be continuous improvement. So if you're meeting the targets for you have like 5 different ways to succeed to have a school that's performing. If you're doing one of those, then you're okay. It's if you're doing none of those and you're not addressing it that raises the issue, and it raises a systemic issue. Do we need to, really take away your authority because you're not serious? On that happy note,
Thank you. Will you all give him a round of applause? Okay, so I'd like to switch gears and highlight for you kind of some of the output of our work, and also based off of kind of the output from our meeting last week, I actually want to spend some time on making sure that it aligns now, given some of the new information that we just received. There may be some things that are not in alignment. So if you wouldn't mind going towards the very back of your slides, I think it's page 50. So what we're in the process, I want to thank everybody who has completed your homework. Yes.
I'm sorry, I'm just looking at my email. I asked John Elks in Ruby's group about the IE squared goals with the new 3% when we found out about it the other day, and he kind of mocked it up, and I just thought people might be interested to know that in 2012, 13, 69%
Hold on.
of our schools met the 3%
Here you go.
target. So
Say that all over again.
I talked with,
Oh, wait, hold on. You're not online. Yeah, wait for it.
Sorry about that.
There you go.
I contacted our data and evaluation people when we found out about this 3% target earlier this week, and they took the CCRPI data that we have already and estimated that based on our prior data that about 59% of our schools met the target in 2012-13. So we don't have data going forward from that, and we know that CCRPI is going to look different with milestones, but I just thought that you guys that it was helpful for me to think about what that would mean. So a little more than 40% of our schools did not make that 3% increase.
No, the 3% is only for IE squared. It's at the system level. It's only at the system level. No, they wouldn't be looking at 3%. They would be looking to see is how overall, how is the whole system compared to the rest of the state? And are you making progress? Are you exceeding where the other systems are performing? No, they're not targets. They're not like individual targets. They're going to be looking at comparison to the rest of the state to see how are you performing in comparison to others. Yeah. And I didn't. Yeah, like the like the data that we looked at during the workshop where we were looking at CCRPI and CCRPI against the state. How is APS doing? Are we closing the gap between us and the state? That's what they're going to be looking at. They're going to be looking at that CCRPI. Has the number improved or has the gap widened? Yeah, go ahead. That was you can pass the mic. Oh, you turned it off. Oh, okay, that's fine.
Is it possible to get that same data about where we compare with CCRPI and the state if it were a charter system? You know, how, based on 1213?
Yes, we could.
How would,
I think he can pull that for us.
just to have perspective?
Mm-hmm. But I don't know if she just pulled the charter system, because what I hear you say is if she were just to pull the charter system CCRPI performance against APS performance, how will we compare? I think that's a good question, and we can ask Ruby to provide that.
Yeah, I think for next week we could.
Mm-hmm. That's two really good questions. And so that leads me perfectly to our slide. So we're getting close to the end. We're almost there. Last week, if you didn't already complete your homework, please make sure you complete your homework. And I appreciate all of the detailed comments, commentary, and thoughts, very thoughtful thoughts around the work. We are compiling that, and we're in process of doing that right now. So what you're going to see tonight is kind of a shell for the final report and what you'll be receiving next week. And we'll add some of those additional data points. So the intent for next week will be to provide a full kind of report out, and we're going to provide the kind of like an overview summary. Let me move to the slides. So this will be the table of contents of the report that we'll produce. We will include the APS data analysis to see how we're comparing against the state and looking at some critical data factors in terms of overall performance. We'll have some components to the strategic plan. There are some things that are getting produced. We will have some things. We won't have everything. But I'll share kind of some of the work to date. And then we'll include a review of the options. And so that's actually where we're going to spend our time today, is some of the details around the review of the options, because you all, this is page 50 in your massive set of papers today, and slide 100. So we'll provide for you tonight. I've taken all of the group notes and the workshop notes from your group breakouts, and you'll see the high level of those. We're going to go over that as a team and then be able to kind of update those based off of what we heard from Lou. And then I want to talk to you about the courses of action. I've taken your courses of action, and now these may need to be updated as well, so I want time for us to talk about that. And then I also kind of have identified some timing thoughts that I also want to get your feedback on in terms of timing. So I'm going to skip through to slide 103 within the strategic planning bucket, and I just want to talk to you about a topic or introduce a topic, because I'm hoping to bring the details of this topic to you next week as a part of the strategic plan. So some of the work that the senior team has been engaging with the leaders in that group, as well as some of the principals. We've been having conversations about this topic of a theory of action. And if you'll recall, when Gwinnett was here, when Fulton was here, they talked about their theory of action and what it meant for them in terms of their work, and that the model that they had really supported their theory of action. A theory of action for change in education comes from an author. I think he's a professor. He's an author. His last name is McAdams, Dr. McAdams. The book is from 2006, and it talks about what can school boards do to improve instruction. What are the core theories or strategies that a school board can take or a school system can take to improve student achievement? And so there are three major buckets or definitions for how you can improve student achievement. One is around this idea of managed instruction, which means that, and that's the bucket on the left, that everything is created and tightly held from the central office. It's very standardized from the central office in terms of making sure that every single school has resources, assessments, and intervention strategies from the central office. It's very tightly held. And oftentimes, school districts will do that to ensure that they're driving consistency of practices across schools. The second bucket is somewhere in the middle. I'm going to go ahead and go to the right, and we'll talk about the one in the middle in a minute. But I want you to see the two extremes. The other theory is around performance empowerment, where teachers and principals are given the autonomy and are empowered to drive major change at their local school sites. And so schools will then, instead of it being centralized, it's very localized, in which schools take ownership of decision making and assume accountability for results. Schools make decisions regarding curriculum and assessments and staffing, resources, based off of the individual needs of their school. So you can see to the left is one extreme, very centralized, very tightly controlled, consistency, standardization. Things to the right are more about autonomy. It's a very decentralized approach, and is based off of, usually is customized for each individual school need. And then you have what's in the middle, what they call managed performance, or a blended approach or a balanced approach, where the district utilizes some kind of a balanced approach between autonomy and accountability, directive versus balance between centralized and standardized. There's some things that they allow customization and some things they want tightly held, standard across all schools. So I wanted to share this because this has been part of the conversation that we've been having with principals, not by term, but more about what do you need central office to do? What do you want control over in your schools? What are the things that you want done? And what are the things that you want to do in terms of the local school level? Now, that may not seem like a big thing, but actually it's a huge thing. It's a huge thing. And so it drives how you organize, it drives how you resource, it drives the support, the staffing. It really can drive a lot of things. So it's pretty significant. I will say for Atlanta, we have not, as a school district, I have not seen a theory of action for Atlanta articulated, written, and used to drive the strategic planning process. But under the new administration, we're trying to articulate this, figure this out, and have this to drive our work. Because, like I said, it connects to so many different pieces. So one of the activities that we as a leadership team have done, and I've posted these up because I want you to have a chance to do the same so that you can kind of get a sense of what does this look like in practice. Many school systems use a theory of action to drive their work and to organize their work. So what you see around the room is You'll see Charlotte-Mecklenburg. You'll see Gwinnett County and their theory of action. You'll see DeKalb County and their theory of action. Fulton County and their theory of action. And then ACME, which is a made-up school board. But to kind of show you how school systems use this to connect to their work and to connect to their strategic plan. Yes?
A little bit about, so if this is starting this conversation,
Mhm.
is there like a timeline or a process? Like if you could kind of speak to maybe, this is maybe a new conversation, so I'm just wondering what you're hearing so far, or if it's too soon to tell, and
We've been engaging in this conversation, I'd say, for at least 4 weeks. And we have a good working draft that needs to make some passes. We met with the principals the first week in September, and we didn't necessarily ask it like this, but we asked, what are your key priorities? What do you want central office to work on? What are the things that you need support? If you could drive the priorities within the strategic plan, what would they be? And they produced a list for us in terms of the 4 major areas. And I'm gonna flip real quick. Oh wait, hold on. So just because it's a little easier to read, if you go to this map, this logic map, we asked the principals to tell us, in terms of the academic program, which is the orangey color, what things do you need support for? And they told us things like, we need help with curriculum. We need help with making sure that our teachers have support with professional learning around the Common Core. We need help with assessments. We want, assessments that can be used across the system. There were a lot of things on the list, and I'm going to share, and you'll see in just a second, I'll show you some of the output from that we've been looking at. The other thing we asked from them in terms of the talent strategy, what things do you need support for as it relates to talent and staffing? And they gave us feedback in terms of hiring and making sure recruiting happens earlier, making sure that onboarding happens in an efficient and effective way, that there's consistency around that. Those were some of the things that they had mentioned. And then in systems and resources, they talked a lot about having an instructional management system, which is the system used to help. A lot of things can go in there in terms of like the curriculum, some of the assessment data, and having a place where everything could kind of be housed. They talked about our systems not talking and getting that fixed. They also talked about, within the resources bucket, they talked about having some control with their budget, and that based off of school need, and cluster need too. They talked a lot about cluster need and school need, that there needed to be support for resources at the cluster and school level, and that they wanted to be able to customize based off of what was happening at their particular school. And then in terms of the culture, they spoke a lot about just helping to transform the culture so that there would be collaboration and engagement. Were probably the 2 biggest buckets. If you turn to the next slide, in terms of the initiatives, I should have had a big old draft here. These are not necessarily real initiatives, but these are where people said it would be nice to have the following things and the following work bubble up. Now this list has to be prioritized. It's already been kind of condensed, but under academic program, we've heard a lot about we need more support with Common Core, more support with formative assessments, literacy and reading, focus on math. The operating models topic has come up. Pre-K has been huge, a lot of interest in ensuring that we've got a stronger pre-K program. Cluster planning has been a huge topic of conversation. People have said that they want it across the system, not just in one cluster or another, but that we need to plan together as clusters so that we can have better alignment and articulation, that things are broken, and that we want to have better articulation there. A lot of time and conversation around college and how do we help with college partnerships, better college access, early enrollment, dual enrollment, programs like that. The Career Academy, social emotional learning is also another huge area within the academic program. And then how do we make sure that schools on day one, we had the smoothest day one ever this year, but it was painful getting there. So how do we make sure that we can, from an operations standpoint, know that our schools have what they need, not just on day one, but every single day? So that is something that they talked a lot about. Teacher and leader recruitment initiatives, career pathways, leadership development programs. Our bench is very thin. So how do we build up our bench again so that we've got a strong bench strength in terms of lots of leaders in the pipeline for our schools and for central office. Instructional coaching, improved onboarding. Under culture, you see renewed commitment to values and norms, employee engagement, norm development. We're doing something called Gallup Strength Finder, which is based off of the Strength Finder book in terms of leadership development of some of the work that we're doing. Accountability and performance management, huge, 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 huge. Doing that in a consistent way. Ethics, making sure that the additional ethics training is more robust. Under our systems, data warehousing and connecting the data, IMS, which is our instructional management system, budget planning, I talked about that already, equity, school calendar, planning tools and having tools. It was funny because a parent had emailed and said, I know you guys have like some master planning calendar where you know all the activities that are happening in the district. We do not have that. I wish we did it, but it is a huge need. So we can't click on a day and know that today there's an advisory, a town hall, a this, a that, a meeting at Long. Someone texted me there's a meeting at Long. We don't have a master planning calendar that has all of that on there. Nutrition, obviously a big concern, and then facility and safety and security. So this kind of gives you a little bit of a window into some of the challenges, some of the needs, some of the things that people are asking for in the system. It doesn't mean we're going to go do all these things tomorrow, but it does give you an idea that that our community, our internal employees are saying that we need this, or we are hearing external. These are huge needs. So we're trying to figure out and prioritize this bucket, but this has not been prioritized. Yes?
Based on these identified needs, do we know how many of them require flexibility?
Yes, sorta, kinda. So I kind of started to look at the list to see, could these benefit from flexibility, or would flexibility be needed? And so I'll just take Career Academy as one that I saw that we were discussing what this could look like for APS. It's been an initiative that has been in the pipeline now for a year and a half, about a year and a half-ish. And this is one area in which 2 years, 2012, April 2012. And so this is one that when I saw on the list, I said, we're doing career academies, and it's work that we're already doing. And that's also something that I think that there's some tie to flexibility and waivers. And so that's one that I'm pretty sure there's a direct connection to waivers. And we could get assistance and support around Career Academy. And I don't know, Alan, if you want to speak to that, but I just know that there is a connection there in terms of career academies.
There is. I mean, so that I don't want to get too far in the weeds, but it does require the reason that the state.
Hold on.
I mean, one reason that the state has picked the charter school model as the career academy model, or vice versa, is because I think because the way that there's an anticipation that folks would be hired from industry, and what you're doing is you're creating pathways that lead to address specific job data and job, their deficits. Folks aren't graduating into the, their positions to be filled. So there's an assumption that you would get a benefit from hiring folks from industry who may not be highly qualified by other means, but could be highly qualified if you had the flexibility to waive the certification requirements. There's also there's an assumption in that model that you would form deep partnerships with businesses and colleges. That doesn't necessarily require flexibility, but.
So just another example, I was kicking off a process to revise our promotion and retention policy and regulations this past week, and had a really deep conversation with one of our elementary schools and the principal and her instructional coach about how the standard model for EIP is not working with their kids, and that they really are interested in pursuing a waiver of the standard EIP model. And the gifted coordinator was also in this particular meeting and said that there were some schools like Dr. Bachman's school, I think, came up that might benefit from a different kind of model for gifted services, because we have some schools that have so many students qualifying for that program that the standard models are not necessarily the best choice for us.
Those were, as I was just looking at the initiative list the other day, and we were talking about career academies, that I was like, wait a minute, I wonder if it was 2 days ago, we were talking about the career academy, and then I pulled out this list, and I thought to myself, I wonder how many other things. Now, I don't know where we're going with school calendar, but school calendar also jumped out at me. I know that some school systems, I'm not going there, but I'm just saying, I was just looking at things that were connected to waivers. I'm not saying that we're trying to extend the school day or the school calendar time, but that is an area that it could connect to. The budget planning piece, with school principals wanting flexibility around line movement, where they want to spend their resources, and tailoring their budget at a local level. That was another one that I circled. I was like, that's something that.
But is flexibility needed for that?
It depends on how much customization I think we're talking about and where the lines would move. So I think it depends, but I think as we kind of explore and these initiatives get more solid, we'll be able to dig. But I think it's kind of like the chicken or the egg. I don't think we can say for sure, because these things aren't final. The strategic plan isn't final yet, but it's something that we can explore next as this gets more final and we determine, or the board and the superintendent determine which model. But that would be the next step.
There's a good number of them that could benefit from flexibility.
I think it's fair to say that there's at least a couple on the chart that could be potentially, yes. Yeah, teacher pathways and compensation, also another connection. Say that again. Wait, what did you just say? Yes. Steve Flint from Gwinnett, or Fulton, Ken Zeff. Ken.
He said he had a booklet on things you do not need a waiver for, but go ahead and do. Can you start with that and check off the list that you're looking at now, rather than waiting for chicken and egg?
Yeah.
Someone's created something.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
It doesn't make any difference what your choice is. It's still informative.
Yep. It's a good idea. Maybe I can do that between now and next week. Get the book, but that's a good idea. Yeah. Corinne? Oh, okay. Their website? Okay, we can take a look at that. I'd be happy to try and take a look at that. But I wanted you to kind of have an idea. So kind of going back to managed performance versus managed instruction, managed performance empowerment. The district is trying to figure out, like I said, the larger question I think they've got some drafts. It's very drafty. But I wanted you to kind of have a sense, now that we've heard from Gwinnett, we've heard from Fulton, I wanted you to kind of just do what we call in education a gallery walk. And I actually want you to just have some time to look at the posters that are in the back of the room to get a sense of what the theory of action work will result in and how it will be connected to our strategic plan. Ours may not look like theirs. I don't know what ours exactly will look like, but I know we'll have a theory of action, and the theory of action is going to drive some of the finer points to the strategic plan. So if you wouldn't mind taking a pause, kind of get up and stretch, and take a look at the different examples. This will be a good pause, and then we're going to come back, and then I want to walk through our work. coming back. We're almost there. So if I can get you out earlier today, I will. Okay, so if I can get you out earlier tonight, I'm going to try really hard. We'll see how we do. In terms of time, so this gives you an idea. I hope to bring back to you a draft of the theory of action so you can see what that is, and where that, and you'll notice language in all of them. Different people are at different places with their theory of action and whether they think things are centralized or not centralized, whether they feel like there's school level autonomy, etc. So I want to get to I want to review the options and I want your input. Page 54, slide 108 has what are the outputs from our meeting last week. I'm going to go through each model, and given what Lou said tonight, I want you guys to tell me if these still jive, if there's something that's not aligned, or if there's something I mistyped and you don't agree with the statements. So advantages for IE squared. You all said that the waivers are outlined within the application. The expectation is that the waivers are clearly identified up front for both school and district level innovation, that there's potential savings from the waivers. There is no expectation for changing the governance model at the local school level, that APS is familiar with school level targets, that the model allows for differentiated flexibility based on school needs, meaning that some schools could have certain waivers, other schools could have different waivers, and that the model is centrally managed, that there's less change management and less training that's required. The disadvantages for IE squared. Oh, yes, less. Sorry, thank you. Thank you for the correction. That's why we're doing this. The disadvantage for the IE squared model, the school system is locked into waivers for the contract period, that there's uncertainty. Now that doesn't apply, so I can get rid of that one, I guess. So maybe, so that one doesn't apply anymore, right?
Yeah, but you could replace that with 41% of our schools in the past have not had this type of level.
Okay. She said 40% of the schools wouldn't have made it last year, or under the 2013 CCRPI. That 40% of our schools would not have made the target.
It's a 3% difference between where the school is and 100. So so a school that had a high CCRPI would have to grow much faster than a school with a low CCRPI.
Only 3 out of 5, and you get to look at the benchmark for the 2 years before.
3 out of 5 years. You have to meet 3 out of the 5 years. And what was the last part?
The last part was he said that it's the first benchmark year is 15-16, so they wouldn't actually start looking until 3 years from now. I guess.
First benchmark year is 2015, 2016.
But that then means that if it's a 5-year contract, we have to make it 3 consecutive years because we will already be in the contract?
No, but it sounded like what he said was that we probably would have less than a 2-year contract. Or less than a 5-year contract because they
The first year wouldn't count.
differentiate low performing districts.
This first year, you said it's a 3 year.
First year is a free year, so it's kind of,
First one's always free.
okay. That's how they get you. Okay, severe consequences. So the baseline year would be the advantage. And then okay, concerned with schools meeting the target given our recent performance. So is it still severe consequences for poor performance and not meeting school level targets, including loss of governance over schools? No. So it's not severe anymore.
And then there are consequences that we are largely designing.
Consequences the system is designing.
Under advantages, I think the one thing that's interesting that you said under advantage is the fact that during the contract, the system could go into the school and reconstitute the school. It's not waiting for the state to come down and approve it, but you could be proactive in the system and say, gosh, this group of people is not the right group of people for these students, or
The school needs to be reorganized and the district can do it on the state.
Well, it sounds like if the district shows that they are making progress or that they recognize that and they are taking steps towards it, then that's looked favorably upon.
Right, and not necessarily meeting the desired improvement.
The showing
But just
progress
showing
towards.
here's a menu of things that we will do to hold our schools accountable. This is what we've kicked in.
So school,
Are we adding the advantages part for that? I mean, is that,
I think that's
I
an
think it's an advantage that like the system
can proactively intervene. Intervene. What was the question? I'm sorry.
have it make a different decision. Like you could lose your charter, but I would guess that you would probably put an expert instead of a charter.
But you can't go the opposite, you can't go charter. I think
you can, but what we said the last
Wait,
time we
Carol,
did was that,
go ahead.
if you're,
Yeah, that
It's on.
it's on.
charter, there's like less accountability. So you said something, I feel like you said something about they wouldn't want to do that because that's sort of, you're not meeting your targets now in IE squared, so why would we allow you to have more flexibility?
Yeah. I mean, I remember his main thing was like if you start off status quo, that they would look upon it less favorably when you were trying to go in a different direction. But I could be misremembering.
Okay. That's what he said. Okay.
Trying to get an IE square, which has got specific targets. If you can't make no target, why would I give you something to make a target? I think that was the logic that they talked about.
Okay. All right, so we'll include the baseline year under advantages, that there is, that the school system can proactively intervene under advantages. Under disadvantages, I'll rewrite the language so that the consequences is based off of the system's design. That, well, you still got to implement some kind of consequence, right?
I don't know if any of that is, I don't know how much of that remains a disadvantage. There are going to be consequences, that's why we're doing this exercise. But I think the fact that we can decide what works for our schools as a district and on an individual school level, I think that ends up being an advantage.
Okay, okay. So the next bullet says may not have flexibility to change contract terms once contract has been signed. That still sounds to me like that is the case. That you need to outline the waivers up front, but there's an amendment process.
You could always add waivers, is what he said, basically. You could start off with 8 and add 3, right? As you discover a need.
it sounded like when it is like a big, realm of purvey, and then maybe who knows what they're using it for. That's like better to pick big if it's always 3%.
Pick big. Maybe that should go under key considerations maybe for this model is to pick big.
Well,
Maybe.
he said don't pick big though, because he said you have to make sure you align all of your waivers to student outcome or system outcome.
So align waivers.
You have to make an
Okay.
That was it, basically. The more you have, the less they're going to believe you actually use those. I think that's the point, sort of a sharp differentiation from charter schools, where they encourage you to apply for the full flexibility, no matter what.
I think you're right. I think with IE Squared, they want us to sit down and think through what would this waiver mean for this school and why, as opposed to we just want full flexibility.
But it's something that's like, for that presentation, you just, like they said, once they have the list, and the schools look at the list.
Sorry.
Yeah, and in a way, it doesn't make sense, because like, is it only the charter system application that has innovation? Like, you have to tell them things that you're doing that are innovative.
Okay, so, oh, go ahead.
He basically left us with the impression that he went through and identified all these waivers, and he put all of them in the application at that point in time.
Those rules have changed.
Yeah,
That was the point that.
yeah, and I think in their original IEs where they had maybe 14
Yeah.
waivers, and then
wasn't
it
fully
sounds like
baked
they've increased it, and then they said, they went back and said, well, why do we want all 30? And then asked them,
Well, what,
yeah, give me your information.
the word on the street was that they were trying to make it attractive because they wanted someone to sign on for IE Squared, which is why initially they allowed that to happen.
Maureen, I'm sorry.
Am I correct that last week you said something new was stated, that if you went charter, you could have flexibility and have a year to develop the plan?
Yeah, that's what I was asking him, because that language has now been kind of publicly released. And what he was saying is that they're going to like release the I square language so you'd also have more time, but that has not been released, which is what Laura Lashley read to us last week.
Right.
And so he's saying that you would be able to get, that the language would match for IE squared, that you would get the time, the extra time for IE squared.
So I was gonna say, otherwise that would be a disadvantage under IE squared if you don't have that time built in like you would with charter.
Right, that's right. You said it could be an advantage? Yes. Let me put that down. The only thing that, but both of those, to me, there's a caveat there because it hasn't passed the state board yet. He said that one's going to go up in December. The other one's going up in November. So they're not, they're being reviewed now, but they haven't passed. Yeah.
And I think they're going to.
Yeah, I think, yeah.
And I think that might not so much be advantages concerned or both, but there are considerations to be.
Considerations.
I think it distinguishes it from the status quo. Like, they have a shared, like, we were comparing the two models.
And you still receive those waivers
Yes.
during that time?
During the 15-16 year. Okay, so what I have now is that there may not have that there may not have flexibility to, there may not be the, because it's a contract basically, there may not be the flexibility to change the contract unless you go through an amendment process, and I'll change that language. Schools would be held accountable for meeting targets. This still applies regardless of individual school circumstance, but they now give you the 3 out of 5 years, which was not there before. Under cultural considerations, cultural and behavioral concerns with school level targets, and with the link of the culture of targets associated with the cheating scandal were some of the considerations. The school level readiness, whether we've got schools that are ready for this additional accountability, which goes back to what Rebecca mentioned with whether they can meet the 3%, if that's a reasonable additional target to be placed on our schools.
I don't know if I would, as just a suggestion, but not even additional accountability, but individual accountability.
Okay.
Because I think accountability has to be held at all schools.
Yes.
But it's a difference between looking at it individually through IE square or district-wide through charter.
Yes. Okay, great comment. It seems like now it's not before. there was a lot of talk about making sure that the contract negotiation was critical to this process to ensure that the district needs were met and that those things were incorporated. I still think it's important because it's a contract. And then the outside agency sets targets. And now that it's a 3%, maybe it's, one of the considerations is that it could help with trust building or it could be viewed negatively. It could go either way. And then the strategic plan must align and support operating model decision. And I think that also goes to his comment around aligning the waivers and thinking through the waivers. So that's the IE squared, and I've made edits to that slide, and we'll update the slides based off your comments. Uh-huh.
They are still having, like, they're still setting that 3%, but it's not,
Goes to setting the 3%, yes.
but I don't see, I think that the orange parts remains, but I don't see how that's gonna affect, like, I think the trust building was before they said, okay, the tier.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying, because we were previously talking about GOSA going through and looking at each of our schools individually and setting targets for them. Under this scenario, they just came up with this number, 3%, but it's for everyone. So I don't think I didn't make this comment, but I was thinking about this issue before. I don't think the issue of trust
Doesn't apply now
applies as much.
because it's a flat percentage. Okay, I'll make that edit to the slide. All right, so let's look at charter system. Under charter system, this is what you guys said. Advantages that there are broad waivers that allow for innovation and flexibility to tailor and customize programming. That the school system has flexibility to change the waivers throughout the contract period because this year you use these waivers, next year you decide to use different waivers. You don't have to go through anyone to change those waivers. There's potential savings from waivers. That the governance model helps to drive collaboration and engagement at the local school level, that the model allows for differentiated flexibility based on school needs, so depending on each school's needs, they could tailor the flexibility that's needed, and that there's additional funding may be available to support schools. Under disadvantages, it operates on a 5-year contract. We must exceed state averages and performance to maintain our charter system status, that the charter could be revoked, resulting in the system conversion to status quo, that school level skill and capacity for additional autonomy, and so this really speaks to leadership capacity. There was concern about whether principals had the leadership skills and the capacity and the training to be able to operate on given more autonomy. The school level leadership and governance teams had to be adequately trained and supported, and that central office support structures and service will need to align with a new operating model to ensure that schools have their needs met. Under key considerations, that this drives a major cultural change for collaboration, engagement, and empowerment at the local level, that school level readiness, many schools are not ready for additional autonomy and or governance changes, that there was concern with PTA, local school council, etc. That central office readiness also may be an important consideration. Central office may not be ready for the services or the cultural shift needed to support more local autonomy. That the strategic plan must align and support operating model decision, and that this adds to our initiative list. So you all said that this is one more thing, and that it takes away from the focus from getting the basic or the core improvements needed for our school system. So were there any additional changes? Go ahead.
That capacity,
Uh-huh.
I think also applies to school communities. 'Cause I think
Yeah.
school communities probably would need some support from that for the governance area.
I also am not convinced that it changing central office support structures is a bad thing. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
We're going on the assumption that we're not doing well with that now.
Yeah.
I would agree.
Okay, so I'll put it under key consideration, or do you want it as an advantage? Key consideration, yeah.
Either has to go in the first and the second, or
Okay. Okay. All right, so let's look at money. Yeah. Sure. Currently. Yep. I'll put the cap too.
So Angela, if we put in IE squared the notion that only 41% of our schools are currently meeting the target, is it important to know where we stand in terms of exceeding the state average under a charter system at this point?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm going to ask Ruby to do some calculations in terms of how we compare with the state as it relates to this and your earlier question too.
And I'm assuming that our startup charter school scores would not give us a lift there.
Our charter schools give us a lift, is that what you said? They would be a part of,
It would not be part of the data they look at. They would be truly separate.
they would be separate.
They wouldn't drag, they would have to drag this.
Okay. Yeah, we had,
Seven
it,
elementary schools exceeded the state average on CCRPI.
only 7?
7. And only,
Oh, so we already have it from previous.
oh yeah, this might not be comprehensive as to.
Okay, we'll get it. I'll have her to bring that next week because I need it to go into
Yeah, it's a
the
partial list, so
template.
we need the full list in order to see really the percentage.
Where they stack up. Okay, so under status quo, this is what you all had. Advantages, there's no application or contract is required. There's no governance changes that are required. There's no investment or time focused on, additional training for a new model. The ability to watch and see what works in other Georgia districts. The ability to keep the focus on system needs rather than operating model implementation requirements. Under disadvantage, the financial impact of loss of waivers and loss of savings. APS would have to make up between $40 and $50 million in the budget by either raising revenue or cutting expenses. Shifting. Say that again. Shifting. I don't know. I think it could be either.
It wouldn't be, like, if we cut the overall budget and still would have 65% of our money going into the direct instruction, we wouldn't be needing to require that.
Chuck, on this, is this a shift or a cut? If we were making up the $40 to $50 million from the waivers, the savings, would it be a shift or a cut? Or both? It would be a cut somewhere else. Okay, just.
Fixed pie. We're going to putting into this category again.
So it'd be both. Okay, just a point of clarification. There would be no waivers or flexibility for 5 years unless hardship. So I'm going to add that language. Public perception was something that you all noted in your discussions. Uh-huh.
That financial column. I think this still remains true, is that if we don't choose status quo, decide to kind of sit, wait, and watch, then that's $50 million in 15, 16, but if we don't get approved for 16, 17, there could be a loss of waiver. So it could be consecutive years. Loss.
The $50 million is the amount
cumulative.
But you would feel the effect of that $50 million cut. Get a waiver.
Right.
Until you chose.
So you chose a different model, Mr. Chairman, you wouldn't be able to get a waiver from the status quo.
But are you saying you would feel the 50 million all in year one, or would it be a little bit year one? So we're not talking in 1 year we
Feel
have to
like-
find $50 million.
15 million,
Okay.
20 million a year,
So it stays.
be phased in.
That's a lot of money.
So,
Right. That would be,
So we would get our 2% the first year,
you can just by year.
shifting the money from something else.
Right.
so is the total more along the lines of 20 million that we would feel kind of per year on average?
Probably like more like 15 million per year,
Okay.
average, until you achieve the 65%.
Is class size waiver, is that inclusive of?
Waiver would count towards that.
So the first year will be 22.5, and then
If you
subsequent
chose to
years
go
would
the,
be like 2%, right?
right, you eliminated the class size waiver out of the box, that would give you 2.5% or so towards it, but then you still have to make another 2% foul.
So, but you are still losing money every year until the decision's made, right? So you're losing 2%.
You're always shifting the money by a minimum of 2%.
By a minimum of 2. And the 2% would equal the 15 that you were talking about?
Approximately.
Yeah,
If
okay.
you think you've got about a $660 million.
Okay. All right, so I'm going to adjust the language in that so that it more accurately captures the loss. Okay, under key considerations, the loss of the waivers may result in overcrowded classrooms if the state class size ratios are used, which could result in redistricting in some schools. The district would need to plan and determine how to balance the budget due to the loss of waivers.
Confused about why not having a class size waiver would result in.
And this is a little logic, but
Oh, did I say it wrong?
The wording on there is not right. Overcrowded schools, not classrooms.
Oh, sorry.
And I don't know that we need to say it could result in redistricting, because it could result in lots of things. It
Yeah,
could result
that-
in more portables, it could result in, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I just think
Okay.
there's lots of, I mean, that is a consequence.
Portables.
You could say,
For example, i.e. portables, redistricting.
example, but I think there's other, I was just gonna say, for example,
Okay. I'll put i.e. for example, and I'll list some examples. Okay. The district would need to plan and determine how to balance the budget with the loss of waivers, and planning would need to begin as soon as possible. Yes? We could operate under a status quo model to allow new superintendent time to establish new strategic direction. The perception that we would remain operational as is does not denote a major change agenda to improve or innovate thinking.
going back to the other one, it sounds like the conversation I heard is that if you choose status quo model, it's unlikely they'll let you switch to a different model.
I'll put that under a disadvantage,
So you really can't buy time for a superintendent.
that if you,
whenever we have on the first call, that we can watch whether the district is doing what they're doing.
but if you watch and wait,
You do have, a week or two ago, you do have the ability to go status quo and to choose another model at some later date.
mhm.
You have to have indicated some, you have to, you know, if you choose status quo, that's fine, it's not like you can choose. What it is like, you know, if we choose status quo and a year from now we decide to. If we choose status quo and then a year from now we decide that we want to instead be IE squared, Lou did a couple of weeks ago indicate that that was something you could do. You just couldn't wait around and not do anything. You have to do something, but then you can change it later.
Okay, so what I think sounds like you can wait and change later, but what I thought that I heard is that there could be a delay in the acceptance. So delay in the potential. Some of the benefits would not. Mm-hmm.
I think under every model, the superintendent's going to have time.
Well, now. Yes, yeah, you're right. Okay, so I'm gonna, yeah, I'll remove this one. Okay. Okay, all right, great. So those are the things that you guys talked about in whole group, and I have kind of summarized, and I'll edit based off of the comments from today. So the next part I want to talk to y'all about is, so I think the question around the courses of action center around one important question: is flexibility needed given the direction we're trying to go as a system? If it's yes, that means one thing. If it means no, it means another in terms of the courses of action. So I've bucketed page 57, top slide, you'll see if flexibility is needed to support our direction, and what the options are there. Last week, you guys talked about a few possible courses of action, and I kind of bucketed in the following buckets. So option 1, status quo. We could do status quo for the full 5-year period. B, we could select status quo for a short interim period, 6 to 12 months. Or C, we could select status quo with the intent that we're going to try for a hardship request for just the class size waiver. That's what he said today? Yeah. Not an option. Okay, so I'm going to remove that as a course of action.
Well, maybe. I was going to say status quo for a short interim period, 6 to 12 months. Is that needed if we have a 12-month period if we choose one of the other options?
Well, I just know that that was part of kind of what you guys mapped out. I'm open to whether we think that B is a course of action for the administration to consider. And maybe 6 months is not the right, and maybe it's maybe.
Instead of saying for a short interim, it might be status quo with the option of review, going back and
Reviewing
after
a year.
Right, status quo with the intent of reviewing after a year. And to potentially move towards something.
With the intent of reviewing and changing course after a year, or reviewing decision after a year. Okay, I'll change that language. All right. So then the other options that you all had was IE squared. You talked about IE squared kind of in a more of a general sense, but this is what based off of the notes, what I saw. IE squared with only the current waivers APS uses now, and this was based off of the language previously from IE squared about the lower the number of waivers, the lower accountability. So IE squared with only the current waivers APS uses now, we won't really need to apply for others. Or we could have IE squared to drive innovation and waivers centrally at schools. Under charter system, you talked about charter system with local school governance and that we would have a phased approach. And then charter system with local school governance and a cluster governance model incorporated into the charter system approach. And I didn't put this, I supposed it, because I knew that we had talked about, and so you can tell me if this comes off, we had talked about a way to phase it. And so this is a way we could potentially phase it if it is a cluster-driven model. So if that's something that you don't want, just let me know. I could take it off, but I know if we were going to try and phase it, we need a way to do it. So do those look like the courses of action that the administration could consider?
So why, I guess under IE squared,
Mm-hmm.
why would the administration just put A? Like, why would you not?
Well, originally,
I know, I get that, but knowing what we know now, do we want that?
that's a good question.
Are these just supposed to be potential options, or are they supposed to be actual
This was potential options. Remember, we were brainstorming yeah, this is not, because we don't have the ability to recommend.
Like this, like we
Say
would-
this again?
I guess what you were saying is ultimately these might be buckets in the report that we give to the superintendent. So I
Yes.
guess if we are going to say, here's the advantages and disadvantages and key considerations, and then here's some possible courses of action, it's like once you're evaluating that, then you're going to try to figure out the kind of the next steps with these. So I think we are going to put, I mean, wouldn't this be in the report?
What do you all think?
I'm not arguing for it to be in or not. I'm just, I was under the impression it would be.
Yes, this is the intent of behind this activity is because as an advisory committee, we don't get to make a final recommendation. What we get to do is collect all of the information, summarize the information, and inform the options that are available that we think are viable options. So
So that there won't be any slant in one direction or another from our report? I mean, I may have had a misimpression these past few weeks, but what element of this comes from us analyzing the information that's been presented
mhm.
and saying, as a group, this is how we recommend you all move forward? Of course, knowing that the board and superintendent are going to choose a plan of action.
Mhm.
How much of this report would be persuasive versus laying out what a definition of what each thing means?
Not just a definition, but how and what the advantages and challenges are with each model given Atlanta and from our various vantage points is what needs to be provided in terms of like a final recommendation and opting for the one choice or the two choices or that we really need to present them as courses of action versus the sole recommendation.
So the course of action, if you went with status quo, this is how it would have to happen.
Yes.
If we chose to go with IE squared, this is how it would have to happen.
Yes. Yes, go ahead.
A suggestion I would have is, under I squared, we get rid of A. and
Okay.
Change B to say I to identify, or to identify waivers, and then it has to be current or additional.
Okay.
especially at school.
Okay.
Because like driving innovation is
Yes. Okay. To drive
so I would
current.
say to, like, I don't know where you're identify waivers, like current or additional.
Identify waivers, current or additional.
That would be the next step, figure out the waivers.
Correct. Okay. So we have under status quo for the 5-year period, status quo with the, with the intent of reviewing in a year. We have one option under IE squared to IE square and identify current waivers and additional waivers. Charter system with local school governance phased implementation, and charter system with local school governance and cluster governance charter driven implementation. Cluster. Yes.
One thing not captured in here is some options around the timeline.
That's coming. So I want to talk about that. Yes.
I got a sense that after you identify the courses of action, at least in my mind, I would come in with a decision tree of how you're going to sort through those courses of action and say that is flexibility needed? Yes, that it's charter system or IE2, it's not needed, that it's status quo. And at least in my mind, I keep going down a tree
So what I think I just heard is that the slide on top, slide 50, the top slide on slide 57, if we were to blow this decision tree out to include those key questions like, is local governance desired? Is there alignment with clusters or schools desired? To blow out the top of slide 57 and to create just a little bit more detail with some of the decision tree aspects to what differentiates each of the models. I see people heads nodding.
Right, and so another point of difference is that can we live with having forced reconstitution of individual schools because we have individual school rules, or the other side of I-squared, where charter district is more of a global sort of district level, right, accountability. We still may tweak it ourselves, that I-squared actually forces us to make school, either the state will do it or local, at school level reconstitution.
It's those type of questions.
But that's the same kind of thing, right? Right.
I don't know if I necessarily agree that community engagement is the deciding factor between the two. Just from the changes that we learned about tonight with IE squared, I was thinking that the deciding factor was actually which model brings us closer to closing that equity gap. And looking at our system as a system, but also as a collection of however many schools we have, and each have individual and community-based needs. So if you frame the tree in terms of our issues of equity, which model brings us closer to a point where we are identifying the waivers that are needed for each school and each community, what we need to do strategically to make the accomplishments we need there, and which model helps us do that. If that means school level accountability, maybe that is appropriate, as opposed to continuing along with the system where we know that certain schools will always achieve and certain schools will fall short of that.
I mean, I will say though, you're right, but on the other hand, the fact that the state is enforcing us to do it doesn't preclude us setting our own goal to do that, right? So it's actually just accepting, in a way you can say it's accepting that we don't have the ability to do that until we're forced to do it. But you're right, it would force us to address.
So is there a way under the charter system where we then could say?
We could absolutely say internally if if we have a disproportionality, to the point where or sort of equity issue of schools, anywhere you can identify the schools, if they drop below a threshold, we will be constantly, but it's an internal thing, the state would force us to do it.
Well, under IE squared, the state isn't really forcing us to do anything but to set up a menu of what our fixes would be and to show affirmatively that we're working off of that menu.
I think the state, but if we don't get whatever the requirements were for IE squared, I don't know. It's hard to say what they're actually going to do, but the concept behind it is that we have to be willing to accept some external consequences because we're external contracted at a school level with these agencies. I mean, it seems like they're softening on that a little bit, but it does bring the focus of those agencies on that school one way or another. For the extent to which they're going to force us to go in, and again, obviously we're softening it, allowing us a little bit of internal mending rather than coming in from outside with turnover, but it's still very different than us setting our own internal. I'm just saying there's a way to do it
but
just one has external element and the other doesn't.
When we first started this exercise, and I heard about GOSA and their involvement with IE squared, I immediately threw IE squared out as being a ridiculous option for us. But just from the changes that were presented to us tonight, I really have the strong impression that under IE squared, this best sets us up to have that hard conversation and action about equity that we've been kicking down the road for years and years and years. And if we're going to be serious about flexibility and thinking innovatively, I think that we ought to, on the other side of that, have the serious conversation about what waivers are needed and work best where.
I'm just saying that we can, it just depends whether we can, again, just that initial point, if we don't believe that we can force ourselves to do that, then.
Well, we haven't done it yet.
I know, right. I wasn't saying it could go either way. But.
As a decision tree, you could have
Can be one of them.
And it could be engagement, equity, and it could be 4 or 5. Is there, and you can flesh out the distinctions between the two models. Maybe there are distinctions that are really, really strong distinctions, or maybe, as you're starting to say, well, maybe the distinctions aren't quite as distinct, and that there's each of the flexibility models kind of can get you someplace in it, but it should be on the tree.
They're overlapping them more and more.
Right.
Yeah. So it's okay. I'm gonna put linear. Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
It's almost like you have these separate decision trees, and then the superintendent will have to, or we could provide some weighting. Like, it's almost like you have all these different things, but which are you going to prioritize?
Yes. Yes.
But I like the idea of making the decision tree more robust.
It is. I was thinking more like the end of the middle school book where you get to pick your own ending. I was thinking that. Okay, for the sake of time, I do have to keep it moving because I want to come to timing. So we didn't talk about this in detail, and now that there has been additional changes to timing, so if you look at the top of 58, the items that are highlighted in purple are TBD in my mind. That if there is an application or petition, depending on which path is selected, that means one thing. And that, depending on if there's a petition or an application, then there's hearings, public hearings that go along with that. I just want you to know that depending on what option is selected. If it's status quo, there is no application, just the letter of intent, and planning could begin immediately. So thinking about that, if you look at the bottom of page 57, 58, we didn't talk about this, but I do want to take like 2 minutes to have a quick conversation about this, and then I can blow it out. But we originally were under this very time constraint around the letter of intent for November, and potentially an application if needed for November. Is that a consideration now? Do we as an advising body feel that November is, and this, you see it says letter, not application. Am I right with saying letter only and not application? Do I have a consensus that that's the right thing? Yes. Yes.
November, application January.
Letter of intent. So letter of intent for November, application, which would be the beginning of November, and then you'd have November and December to develop your app. Or are we looking at a potential, and I don't know, maybe it will be reviewed in October, all this information, I'm not sure, but I was trying to get it so that we could go potentially in October. I don't know if the superintendent will be ready for a decision and the board will be ready for a decision, or for October, what's more reasonable? Uh-oh.
Well, how fun is it to see that rule change for IE squared, the official?
So that's not going to happen until December. We will not know. With either one of these rule changes, we will not know. The one goes in November, the other one goes in December, but from what, like Lou said, and what we're hearing, those things are likely.
Do you think that's because of the massive amount of districts that have not yet done the work?
Yes.
The management piece that they have to.
Yes, I do. Yes.
And when in November are we thinking of for our letter?
Yes, a letter for November.
When in November?
It would be our board, which would be November the 3rd.
I guess what's the advantage of that versus MO2?
So the question was, that's a good question. Thoughts? The budgeting, could you get his, Mike?
I thought I heard that depending on your choice, there's resources available to help you flesh out your application.
And isn't the information needed in order to begin planning the budget?
Yes, it's tightly connected to the budget because he said we would still have to submit for waivers.
Because we will be taking a preliminary budget to the board in March. So.
Yeah, we would have to submit a waiver application in January in order to know by March, April that we were approved.
Okay.
Even the language that Luke has in the new presentation says that the state board may consider. So I don't know. You just have to know you're not doing status quo by January.
And which waivers you would need for 15-16. In order for it to count. No, that's why he said he wanted to give districts time to do the whole application so that you could have a better sense of what things you would need. But the thing that's, to me, I think that's key is that your letter of intent, regardless of which way you go, that's what signals the time. Right. So by putting a stamp on the ground, and you can change the stamp, but by indicating a path, it starts your clock or helps them to know which direction you're going.
And didn't he, if you letter of intent was for a charter system, didn't I hear him encourage us to get the maximum waiver, waive everything and then sort it out?
Automatically comes with it.
Right. So it simplifies that step.
Okay, so let me just, so it sounds to me, letter of intent November, and develop an app before January, or by January, so that it will align with budgeting and align with the state. You'd also be able to, it would be timed kind of along the same lines as the state with some of that additional language. Is that? Mm-hmm.
Maybe next week about
yes.
An application process,
yes.
because you could probably write an application in a couple weeks, but what do you want your process to be?
Yes,
and how
we can
much
talk.
I mean, I think if it's an application process that involves community, then that is a longer process.
Agreed.
Like I think Fulton took 6 months.
Right. Agreed.
So, maybe we could do letter of intent by November, but maybe the application is then spread out over longer, or maybe that's something we.
Or maybe you just decide the initial waivers that you need from a funding standpoint, but then your programmatic waivers, you're working on the application. Yeah. Okay, so that's a great point. So it sounds like to me that the submitting the letter of intent by the end of 2014 doesn't sound like a viable timing. Okay. Okay. Hopefully.
I almost feel happy that we waited to start the conversation because I can't imagine being a district like DeKalb that kind of finished the process before all of the final information about what the options were going to look like. And I wonder if other systems are doing that.
Okay. So if you have thoughts on the community piece, so let me walk us through, and then we have 2 community speakers. Want to make sure we do their time real quick. Next week is technically our final meeting per se. Next week, all this stuff, I'm going to have this blown out based off of the discussion that we had today. I'm going to update the timeline. You'll see way more details with the courses of action based off of the content that you've provided. And so I'm going to have all of the data, and so you'll actually have a rough draft of what we would submit. I would like to ask this body to help to present or be present. I have no idea if we can make this happen, but would like for you all to be there when we actually present the information to the superintendent. So I'm going to try and work out some timing. Her schedule is extremely tight, but I'm going to see what we can do, but it would be in the evening, and maybe we could trade off. And it would have to happen before, well, maybe not now. Would you say? Yeah, so you all said tonight that you maybe were looking for more for a letter of intent in November versus October. It doesn't have to go in October. It could wait till November. In October, it could go, this is what could happen. We could do kind of a review of this information publicly in October, more like at the work session, but no action item is taken. Then public comment could occur, and then in November, then the board could take action. And that's what it sounds like to me based off what y'all just said is what we're suggesting. Everybody's nodding that sounds like a good idea. Yeah, she said it. Yes, that's what I'm suggesting. Sorry. Yes, that's what I'm suggesting. So I'm going to send out final times, but next week would be in the ground, down deep with the report, trying to get finalized, and then we would have a report to be able to know. And then text would be written behind the PowerPoint slides as more like an executive summary once we get the outline right. But so that's kind of the timing. So next week, hang in there, one more week of 2.5-hour meeting, and then following that with the outline changes, and then hopefully a potential meeting with the advisory committee and the superintendent to present. It may not be a formal meeting like this, or maybe it is, I'm not sure, but I'll find out for sure and communicate and share and post. Okay, so we have 2 comments, 2 people to comment. If you, Sita Cook will come forward for the comment period. Yes, you can just hold.
Thank you. This should be short. And I'll say that I know you'll be sorry that I won't be here next week. I'll be out of town. So I'll look forward to looking online and seeing what you decide. I just have one major vocabulary request, and it's something I've been doing wrong for a long time. It started in the legislature. The use of the word flexibility has been used sometimes when that's not what you mean, when you really mean flexibility that requires a waiver. So, for example, on one of the disadvantage of status quo statements was no waiver or flexibility. That's not accurate. It's that some flexibility may not be possible because of a lack of waivers. And then the other example is flexibility needed? Of course flexibility is needed. This district needs that immensely. But there's lots of flexibility that's possible under status quo. It's just that the question should be, does any of the flexibility that is needed require waivers? So that cannot be done unless you have a waiver. And I think if we can all change the use of that word, people won't be so confused in some situations. And then finally, if I were the superintendent or on the board, and you're probably glad I'm not, I would really like to know what either as a group or as individuals you think, if you have a strong opinion, or even if you don't. I mean, in other words, you can't say what's going to happen, but to let them know that we're really nervous about this or we're really confused. I mean, all of that I think would be helpful information for them. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Johnson.
I'd just like to invite you to consider something. McAdams was mentioned in passing. McAdams is Donald McAdams, founder of CRSS. CRSS is the Center for Reform of School Systems. And McAdams, you saw this evening, you saw his theory of action, okay? Now, what I invite you to consider is that McAdams' theory of action is strongly associated with the theory of action of Rod Page. It's strongly associated with the theory of action of Rick Perry. is strongly associated with the theory of action of Eli Broad and the Eli Broad Superintendent Academy. You may be aware that many superintendents that graduated from the academy have caused major disruption in urban school systems with the purpose of preparing them for privatization, takeover by privatization. And that is the theory of action associated with those individuals. One quick question for you. If I were to show you a coin and flip that coin, say 5, 6, 7 times in a row, and got a head each time, what would you say about that coin?
You're lucky.
Now, I don't think you say well, you could say that, or you could ask, well, is the coin what? Fair. Okay? 2 words to make a distinction between continual and continuous. You hear talk about continuous improvement. That's a trap. That, again, is not, okay. That is what drove APS into its cheating scandal. I understand the difference between the word continual and continuous. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Johnson. All right. I want to thank you all for coming out tonight. One more meeting. Hang in there. One more meeting. And I'll see you all next week. Thank you.